Welcome back to Miss Burkhart's math class. Make sure you have your notes and something to write with so you can write as you watch the video. Remember to pause so that you can finish writing your notes before moving on. And of course, as you know, make sure you go back and rewind or rewatch any parts that you want to make sure you fully understand before, there's my cat, before you move on to the next part. So, that was Nicholas, by the way. Today we're going to continue talking about Standard 6.6a, which is including adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers. And specifically today, you're going to learn how to add integers using counters. So let's get started. Adding integers. Remember what an integer is. It is all of the whole numbers, so that would include 0, 1, 2, and on, and their opposites like -1, -2, and on. So what does add mean? What are some other words that we can use to mean add? So here are some here I've written down. To combine, if I'm putting things together, combining things, or one that we'll use especially when we're using counters is to put on. So I may start with one number and then I'm going to put on or add the second number. The first group of examples we're going to start with are when we're adding integers that have the same sign. Sign meaning like they're both positive numbers or they will both be negative numbers. Let's start with the first one that you've been doing since first grade. So yes, I know you know the answer to this, but we're going to use the ones that we know how to do to help us when we get to problems that include the negative integers as well. So let's start with the one we have a positive number plus a positive number. What we're going to first do is start with the first number. I know you know this, but you probably did something similar to this in first grade when you were first learning to add. So we're going to take the first number. You always start with the first number. And our yellow counters are going to represent the positives, and our red ones will represent the negative. Now on your notes, it will be the open circle will be positive, and the shaded in circle will be negative. So we're going to start with two positives because that's what the problem says to do. The first number is what we put on first. Then it says to add. Well, what's another name for adding? One that we said was, for example, to put on. So that means we're going to start with the first and put on three positives. So here's 1, 2, 3. And now we've done the problem. So what do we have? What's our total? And as you know, that we have 5 positives, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 positives. Again, I know you know this. And this could be an example if you're thinking real life. We had 2 positive things happen to you in a day, and then you added on as you were going out throughout the day, you had 3 more positive things happen to you. So you putting all that together, how many things did you have happen? You had 5 positive things happen to you that day, right? Okay, so now let's go on to, well, what happens if you are adding 2 negative numbers? Remember, we're going to apply the same thing we did with the first problem. The first number is what you put on first, right? We start with the first, which in this case is 2 negatives. So here's 1 negative and 2 negatives. All right, started with that. And then addition means to do what? Add, yes, or to put on what? 3 negatives. So let's do that. Do what the problem says to do. Here's 1 negative, 2 negatives, 3 negatives. Make sure you're writing this and drawing this on your paper as well. And if you need to pause so that you have time to catch up, please do so. So now we've done what the problem said, -2 plus -3. And what do we have as a result? Let's count. These are all negatives. And how many do we have? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. So -2 plus -3 is -5 because that's all we have, a whole bunch of negatives. So again, if we use an example like we did with the first one, if I have 2 bad things, right, 2 negative things happen in my day, and then I end up having 3 more bad things, 3 more negative things. Overall, when I'm combining my day, I had 5 bad things happen to me, right? Okay, so that's when we are adding numbers with 2 negative numbers. Now I want you to try these. The video's not over. I know we usually have the you try problems at the end and then we're done. This is just the first part. So yes, you are going to pause the video and I want you to do all 3. Make sure you are drawing the counters on your notes and then figuring out what the answer is. Then you're going to push play and then the quiz questions will pop up. But keep going all the way because we're not finished with the notes. So for right now, go ahead and press pause and do these 3 problems. Okay, how'd you do? And I also want you to ask yourself and write the answers down on your notes. What did you notice about those problems when you were adding 2 numbers that had the same sign? Meaning when you had numbers that you were adding 2 positive numbers or you were adding 2 negative numbers. What did you notice about the answer? And write down all sorts of, all the little things that might pop in your head. Write those down on your notes and we'll talk about those in class. All right, now before we move on to when we're adding numbers that have 2 different signs, let's just refresh your memory about zero pairs. Zero pair, as you remember, is a pair of numbers, or opposites, right? That when you add them together, it equals what? Of course, 0. So as an example, here are opposites, -2 plus +2. And of course, as we know, that equals 0. When you add opposites, it equals 0. Let's show what that looks like again. So here's your 2 negatives, and then you're going to add on 2 positives, and these cancel out. Remember, the bad thing cancels out a good thing. So your day is neutral, right? And or if we were thinking, we talked also about before football. If you got starting at your first play, you got pushed back 2 yards, and then the next play you went up 2 yards. Well, how many yards did you gain in total? None. You're back to where you started from. So you gained no yards, right? So remember, we also said we were going to circle our 0 pairs. There's a 0 pair and there's a 0 pair. They cancel each other out. That makes 0. Same over here. If I start with a positive 1 and then I add a negative 1. So if I start with a positive 1 and then I add a negative 1, well, what happens? When you're adding those 2, they cancel each other out and make 0. It's like if I had $1, but then I owed somebody money, so I ended up losing $1. How much money do I now have? Nothing, because the positive canceled out the negative. All right? Remember that? So we're going to use that to help us when we get to this part, which is adding 2 integers that have different signs. So one number might be is going to be positive and another number will be negative. Different signs, positive, negative. But we start the same way. I am starting with the first number. We put the first number first. That's 2 positives. So I'm going to put down 2 positives. That's what I'm starting with. And then it says to add, or we can write it as putting on, right? What are we going to put on? 3 negatives. So let's do that. Here's 3 negatives. Do you notice how this is different than the problems we did earlier? So now we've done the problem, but what's my answer? Well, it's not 5 negatives. It's not -5 because I don't have 5 negatives. And it's not +5 because I don't have 5 positives. Do you see that? So do you see what happens here? Do you see any 0 pairs? Hopefully you said yes. How many 0 pairs do we have? Well, this positive 1 cancels out that -1. And then that positive have another 0 pair. So both of those make 0, right? This is 0, canceled out. These 2 canceled out. And what's left? 1. But what is it, positive or negative? -1. Good. So in this case, 2 positives plus 3 negatives equals -1. Notice that we had more negatives than we did positives. Wonder if that has anything to do with why the answer was also negative. An example of this, it could be, if I had 2 good things happen to me, right? And then I had 3 bad things happen to me as I went on about my day. Well, overall, that one bad thing canceled out the one good thing, and same here, one bad thing canceled out the good thing. So that made it neutral, right? But overall, it was kind of a negative day. Why? Because I had more negatives happen than I did positives. I had one more negative kind of left over, if you will. Let's try another example. -5 plus +2. Okay, so what are we starting with? Put the first number on first. 5 negatives. 1, maybe 2. And again, make sure you are drawing this on your paper. You'll be using the shaded in circles to represent 5 negatives. There's our 5 negatives. And I'm going to add, or what? Put on 2 positives. So notice I have 2 numbers with different signs. Aha, are any of them going to cancel out? Do I have 0 pairs? Yes. Here's a 0 pair, a negative and a positive. They cancel out. And another negative and positive cancel each other out. So what is -5 plus 2? What's left? Because this made 0. So what do I have here? -3. Again, my answer was negative. Why do you think my answer was negative? You notice how you have more negatives than we did positives? And those 2 positives canceled out 2 of those negatives, right? Made 0, a 0 pair. And what we were left with was -3. All right, but what if we have more positives? So let's try this. What do we start with? -4. So make sure you're drawing this on your paper as well. 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3. -4. And what are we going to do? Add. What's add mean? Put on 6 positives. 1, 2. Notice how I'm lining these up next to the negatives, right? You do the same. 3, 4. Then I have this 5 and 6. So again, 4 negatives. I'm going to put on, add 6 positives. Do I have 10 negatives? No. Do you see 10 negatives there? No. Do I have 10 positives? Nope. I have some positives and some negatives. Now I get to cancel out my 0 pairs. Well, this is a 0, right? That's 0. That's 0. There's another 0. How many 0 pairs did I have? 4. So those 4 negatives canceled out 4 of those positives in the 6. And what was left? So this equals +2. Why was it positive? I had more positives. See how that worked? Than I did negatives. And the negatives got canceled out. Now, it's your turn to try. Again, you're going to pause the video. You're going to draw the counters for each problem to be able to solve it. Cancel out your zeros and write down the answer for each one, and then press play and the quiz questions will pop up. So go ahead and press pause. So what did you notice about these problems when you were adding 2 numbers that had different signs? So one was positive and one was negative. How did you solve this one? And what was the answer? Could you tell from the problem just if the answer was going to be negative or positive? Write those things that you noticed on your paper, and we'll go over it in class. So to recap, in today's lesson, you learned how to add integers using counters. So great job. You made it. Make sure you have your notes, put them in your binder, bring your binder and everything to class, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.